Alright, time for another game theory video talking about stuff I've talked about before, but adding a little bit more to it. So I'm going to talk about today again, kind of almost like the question, can fighting games still progress as like a genre? Are they still progressing? You know what I mean? That kind of thing. I'm going to come from it from different angles. I'm going to come from it from a character perspective of progressing, even like a character archetype of progressing, and as a sort of a vibe, because certain games have different vibes, you know what I mean, but fighting games and 2D games probably particularly, right? And I guess the too long didn't watch thing would be that I actually don't think, which is one of the saddest things, I actually don't think that fighting games actually have a lot of room to grow as a genre. Maybe more specifically, I should say that I don't think that fighting games actually have a lot of chances to grow as a genre. They're running out of chances, right? So I'm going to come at this from like different angles. So again, let's start off with, let's talk about Ryu. Let's talk about Street Fighter, right? We're talking about progressing as a character, right? Ryu, the Fireball Dragon Punch character, right? Video game. We want video games to progress. We want the character idea. Is my camera gonna work? Jesus Christ, man, messing up production here. I should just put Pikachu on camera. He looks better than me anyway. But anyway, so let's take an archetype. Let's take Ryu. We want Ryu to progress, and like I showed in some of my recent videos, I was talking about the hop kick, and I talked about, it started more in Super Turbo when they gave Ryu the Rush Fierce and like the Rush Strong, and they toned down some of the aspects of the Fireball Dragon, the DP's worse and all that kind of stuff. But to try to progress Ryu's character, they added a little bit more offensive capabilities to him, right? And then we get into the idea of what the hop kick could mean to Ryu. And I talked about how I would make the hop kick work in a game like Super Turbo, because again, the hop kick is a potentially very chaotic move that would throw off the balance of the progression of Ryu, because you don't want Ryu to have too much of a, to be too, God, what would the word be? Have too much of a, oh man, Jason, man, my English is really bad. You don't want him to be able to do too much stuff that like other characters maybe. Fuck, what is the English word I'm looking for? Man, my English is bad. Oh boy, I'm sorry about this, dude. I can't think of the word, but Ryu, he's the Fireball Dragon Punch character, but you want to progress him a little bit, but you don't want to give him too much variability. That's not the word I'm looking for, right? You know what I mean? You don't want the hop kick to be functioning like a guile, hop kick, his sabbat kick. You know what I mean? You don't want to be that versatile of a move, because Ryu's character archetype is already something else, right? So I talked about how you could make the hop kick work while still progressing Ryu's character, right? Watch that video, right? Because it's a very dangerous line, right? And then as games like progressed again, let's talk about some of the dangers of progression. We want Ryu to continue to have more moves, but we come into like the problem of why I said EX moves are not real progression for video games. EX moves are generally pretty bad. I think Guilty Gear did them well because the EX moves were generally new moves. They were not just spiced up moves. And so I talked about in my video of why EX moves are bad for video games, because it's kind of one step forward, two steps back, right? So when we look at Ryu, we were progressing him, right? But then we get to a game like Street Fighter 3. If you want to be anal, Second Impact, I think it was called. It's when they first added in EX moves, right? So, they took away the red fireball from Ryu. We don't want Ryu to have, well, again, they took away the red fireball in Street Fighter 3. I don't want to get too anal because I can get pretty nerdy about video games, right? But they took away the red fireball from Ryu, right? It's like, we don't want this fireball to function like this and it can knock down. So let's give him a thrust kick as well, right? You know what I mean? So we're kind of like adding a new move to Ryu while kind of like taking some. It's kind of like you're kind of like, we don't want this move to do this. So you have to pick and choose. Oh, we're going to have like an EX move here. Like now you can do the red fireball, but it's your EX move, right? And, oh man, I don't want to like drag on too much because I'm gonna go on a rant, but EX moves are bad for Street Fighter because if you add in like a fireball, the fireball is so fundamentally important to the way that Street Fighter is played. if you give someone an EX fireball, you have to give everyone an EX fireball just because of the way the game works, right? And too many times in video games, EX moves are just, I'll say it's my special move, but it hits twice. That's why I said, if I was making Street Fighter 3 and I added EX moves, I just would have said like, hey, keep Ryu with the red fireball that he had before, all this kind of stuff, but just make the thrust kick and just an EX thrust kick or something, because then it's still unique, right? You don't want to be giving. The point is, EX moves are too many times. It's just like, oh, here's my special move that hits twice and it juggles. So it's like, okay, yeah, it's like, yeah, I guess everyone has a new thing, but if everyone has a new thing that is sort of doing the same thing, is it really new? Is it real progression? I could go take a shit right now, right? That's something new, but is it really new? It's like, okay, you know what I mean? So again, that's a whole nother video that I talked about. But the point is, sometimes when they were like progressing characters, they're doing so by taking away something. I'm like, oh, here's this aspect of this move that I like, but I think it's too good to be like this. So let's add another new move that can kind of function like it, but then we're going to give this old move function like this. So it's like, that's not real progression to me, right? Even combos, you can think of something like God as combos. You know what I mean? I talked about this like as the progression of video games as well. People thought that simple things had too much of an influence on the aspect of the match. A DP had too much of an influence on the match, right? So combos started becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. But from a certain aspect, I think, of progression, you don't want every character to have big combos. You know what I mean? Because then everything is unique. Like if you get into the idea that like, oh, this is everyone needs this kind of bread and butter combo, everyone needs to be able to have this. Is that real progression either? Like, I understand games need to progress, but at some point, if you're like making the game more combo focused in that sense, it's not real progression either. If combos start getting too big, I think as well, because then everyone has to be able to do it, right? And we're starting to get away from the archetype. We're making Ryu like, oh, okay, we want Ryu to have combos like everyone else. So we want this character to do this, we want this character to do this. The point is, some of these characters start progressing so much in the terms of ideas of what they can do. It just is kind of like an Ouroboros kind of thing, and they just kind of go back and they're right back at the beginning because now through progression of characters, we're starting to give aspects of certain characters that were more unique before. And now when we give it to everyone, the characters are actually not quite as unique anymore, right? So just as some games, if the game is too simple, everyone feels the same. If you start quotation marks making games more complicated by giving characters all these different aspects to their archetype, they start becoming not as unique as well, right? And that's where like there's a very fine balance, I think, in actually progressing games, right? Like I think you can do it, but the point is a lot of characters as they're progressing through games are not actually becoming that unique, right? And when they get something new, it's at the cost of something else. So it's like a step forward, a step back, right? Again, I think you can do certain things to actually like do this better. I've talked about how you would do it, but point is, right? And I think King of Fighters for a while was doing this better because they were progressing their characters while giving you all the EX characters. Like I always think they should definitely do that in games, just not, King of Fighters, but because the King of Fighter characters were progressing in such a way that they still let you pick the old version of the character so you could respect that archetype while still allowing you to enjoy the old version of the character, right? So I think King of Fighters was doing that better for a while because they were, right? And if you even think about characters in general, how often do you actually see a character that is totally brand new, a way new of thinking, right? And I don't think you really see many new characters that are like, wow, that character's bringing something new to the table, right? I think so. I kind of talked shit about Capcom there for a second, but to give Capcom credit, there was a time that and this is a good example. Look at when they started bringing in the Final Fight characters to like Street Fighter Alpha and everything like that. If you take characters like Guy, Cody, Rolento, Saddam, maybe not quite as much. You know what I mean? Um, who else? Who else was a Final Fight character that was added in Alpha? Guy, Cody, Saddam. Well, okay, so maybe not Saddam quite as much. Maybe Maki is basically just kind of a ghetto EX guy, but she's still a little bit new. But the point is, those characters, when you looked at those from like a fighting game perspective, I think you're like, okay, wow, they are bringing like new things. Like, you know, those were well designed characters from a bringing something new to the idea of Street Fighter, I think, right? To a fighting game, right? So you could respect that. But again, how many times do you see a new character like, this new character, you know what I mean? Like they just kind of took away my old character and they're like, that reminds me of that character. Like obviously we need to respect the idea of what made fighting games popular, right? And I've said this before. We need to respect the fundamental ideas of this character is maybe a throw character, this maybe character is a Fireball Dragon Punch character. But too many times now, characters, when you release a new character, the character is just a mismatch of old characters that you already enjoyed before, right? So again, not real progression, mind you, right? That's why I say that I don't think there's actually a lot of room for fighting games to grow, right? Again, I think there's a way to actually do progress characters while keeping stuff with them, but so then we get into the idea of not just characters, but how do fighting games, the genre of like maybe this is a verse style game, this is whatever this kind of game, how do we progress in that way? And that is a little more possible, right? Like I mean, I've said before, I think Guilty Gear at one time was kind of a progression of Street Fighter. You could appreciate the goodwill of Street Fighter, of what made fighting games popular in Guilty Gear. You know what I mean? I talked about how the dust loop saved Guilty Gear. Watch all those videos. Give me some views. Jesus Christ, man. You know what I mean? But you could see the advancement that it was bringing something new to the table. It was teaching you something new that a fighting game could be. It was giving you a new perspective on games, right? Just like the verse style of games, right? It can give you a little bit of a new perspective of what a fighting game can be in that sense, right? So different genres, right? This is why a game like Dragon Ball Fighter Z is so disappointing. This is why a game like Dragon Ball Fighter Z is such a drop ball, right? I know some people think that I hate Dragon Ball Fighter Z. I don't hate Dragon Ball Fighter Z. I've said many times that new things are good. And this is one of the things that people don't get. Dragon Ball Fighter Z actually is a new game. It is a potential progression of what fighting games can be, right? You know, I don't think you could look at Dragon Ball Fighter Z and you see homing dash and you see reflecting and you know all this kind of shit, you know, the tug of war, reflecting, homing dash, fireballs, blah 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 blah. Just think about the system of smashes and everything like that, how it works, right? If you think about it from that perspective, you wouldn't think like, oh hey, we could just put Ryu in this game, right? Because Ryu doesn't fit, right? But Dragon Ball Fighter Z is a drop ball because it was actually an opportunity to progress fighting games. And actually progressing fighting games is very hard, right? Most that's what I'm saying. Like most fighting games now are actually not legitimately progressive. You're not actually seeing new ideas in a game. Dragon Ball Fighter Z actually did give you an idea of something new that a fighting game could be. That's why it's such a drop ball because you're like, wow, it's like, okay, we have chances to put new shit. We have chances to put in new dynamics of how a character could work in a fighting game because these dynamics of what is making this game a fighting game don't exist in another fighting game. They're not actually possible. So we can make characters that are not possible in another fighting game, right? That's why Dragon Ball Fighter Z sucks. Because the game is so fundamentally flawed, you can't even appreciate what the fighting game could have been. Because the game fucking sucks in that sense. The game sucks at a fundamental level. But in terms of new things, Dragon Ball Fighter Z is a success in a sense, right? Because it's actually potentially something new. And that is very fucking rare in a video game nowadays, right? Even say the new Guilty Gear coming out, right? I mean, the new Guilty Gear. Look at how the wall, right? The new Guilty Gear was potentially interesting. Again, the game isn't out yet, so we don't know how it's going to work. But the new Guilty Gear was potentially interesting because, like, wow, there's like a wall mechanic. How are they going to add a wall mechanic into the game, right? Wall mechanic never been done, you know, Dead or Alive, that kind of shit, right? But the idea is that, oh, hey, we're going to be adding a wall mechanic into Guilty Gear, into a 2D fighting game. How can this change our perspective of what a fighting game can be while still respecting the goodwill of what made fighting games popular in the first place, right? And right now, the wall shit just looks boring as fuck. It just looks like, oh, it's something new. It's the same kind of thing as like, oh, hey, I took a fucking shit. I didn't take a shit. I didn't take a shit today. I just took a shit now. I guess it's fucking new, right? You know, that's the kind of shit I'm getting at, right? So it's kind of like fake progression in that sense, right? I guess it's new. And that's the disappointing thing. I really hope that they make it really interesting. I hope it's not just like a cheap pop, you know, because right now it just looks like, man, I'm over it, dude. I took a shit yesterday. It's not new, dude. You know, same shit, new day. Is that basically the same, right? So that's what I'm getting at. So, you know, there's not many chances when people talk about what is actually potentially new in a video game. What is potentially new for a character? And certainly, you know, jacking myself off, I have ideas of how you could progress characters while still respecting them. You know what I mean? Respecting the core idea of what they are, right? And also respecting the other characters in the game to not take away from them. That's important too, right? We don't want everyone to be like, oh, everyone has the same bread and butter combos. It's like, well, you know what? Maybe this character is supposed to have worse combos than this character. They don't have as good B and Bs, whatever, because they're better in other things. You know what I mean? Respect who else is next to you as well in the game, right? To make it different. Because just as every character being so simple can be bad for a progression of the game, if everyone is too versatile, the game is also not progressive in that sense. It's fake, right? And that's why I said characters are very, very rarely do you see characters that are like, wow, a new spin on a character, right? And a new spin on a character that is not one step forward, one step back, one step forward, two steps back, right? Again, I would love to make my own game because I think I could fix some of this shit, but I have ideas. But the point is, you don't really see a lot of that shit anymore. You don't see a lot of new characters that are not just a rehash, you know, Mugen, this character, this move, this, you know, whatever. And you don't see a lot of new stuff in video games, period, that haven't been done before, right? Again, that's why Dragon Ball FighterZ is such a good example because there is so much potential because the game is new. And the game was so new that it actually gave you an excuse to make totally new ideas of what a character could potentially be as well, right? But unfortunately, it didn't trust its own vision. The fundamentals of the game are fucked up, all that kind of thing. You know, who knows how this Guilty Gear is going to be? But you know, Guilty Gear, hey, it's potentially something new in the game. But right now, it just looks like new shit from a negative perspective, right? So again, that's my little comment on can video games, fighting games, the genre actually progress as a game, right? While still respecting the other games, the other genres that made it popular in the first place, right? And again, there's different genres. Street Fighter is its own game, right? You know, obviously Dragon Ball FighterZ is its own game. Marvel games, they're versatile games, right? Their own game, right? But again, how many times do you actually see, you know, real new shit? And that's what I mean. I don't think games actually have a lot of opportunities to show new shit, and it's actually very rare. And that's why it's disappointing. Anyway, yeah.